My name is Kate Weber. I actually grew up in the middle of New York State, so I'm not from here. But I originally came up to Maine as a college student. I went to Bates College right here in Lewiston. Really fell in love with Maine, I guess through contra dancing actually, because one of my housemates loved folk dancing and dragged me to a couple dances, which I thought were really weird at first, but then I fell in love with it and kind of went to different parts of the state to go to dances. So when I graduated, I wanted to stay here. I spent a couple years on Swan's Island off the coast of Bass Harbor, working with a historical society there through the Island Institute. Spent a couple years in Portland, and then went back to New York State for a couple of years to get a museum studies degree, which made it possible for me to come back to Maine again and return to Lewiston. So I work here at Museum LA, which I never expected I would be doing, and I'm so glad to be here. It's been neat living in such different parts of the state, I guess. Each place has its own reputation. Like Swan's Island is kind of in the Acadia area, and most people there were either lobstermen or connected to the lobstering industry. And I feel like I've got kind of different pockets of home in different parts of the state. I definitely didn't want to leave the Northeast because I always want to be within driving distance of my family. And they're still mostly in New York State. And having been back in New York, I've come to appreciate New York a little bit more, but I also feel like the scale is so different. The jobs that I've worked in Maine have allowed me to travel across. I was traveling along the coast a lot when I was working with the Island Institute, and I worked a couple of years with the Maine Humanities Council in Portland, and that had me going across. Like I went up to Madawaska once and accidentally drove into Canada without a passport, which is still, it was very reasonable at the time. It's not as dumb as it sounds up there. But because of that, I feel like I have a sense of what's going on in different parts of Maine. Like I know people in Bangor, I know what's happening there. I've spent a lot of time in Rockland, and I feel like I'm never gonna really get that in New York State because there's so many people and there's so much space, and you don't have those concentrated populations quite as much, and I don't have the network of people there. So I especially appreciated that when I moved back to Maine after a couple years away. And came into this position, I picked up the phone to call a historical society that I'd never heard of before because they did a program that I thought sounded neat. And the person on the other end of the line was like, "Oh, hey, Kate, it's Katie," and we worked together in Freeport, probably 6 years ago, and she's now the director of a historical society. And I feel like that kind of thing I'm not going to get as much anywhere else. I know Maine is huge, but it often feels like a small place that way. Well, being on Swan's Island in particular, people have a very strong sense of community and place there. I think there are just over 300 people there year-round, so if you're from away, you stand out there. But people were just so glad to have someone new come in that they were incredibly welcoming to me. And I found that to be the case in general. I guess living in Portland, a lot of my friends were from all over the country, so younger people who were drawn to Maine. Probably half of the people that I'm close with now are from Maine and half are from different places. And there's that whole idea of, if you're young in Maine, you have to leave to go off and find your career or to get your education, which I think and I hope is changing. There are a lot of people doing amazing entrepreneurial, innovative things in the state now. So I think that maybe is responsible for that balance between, I would think more than half the people I'm friends with now would be from here if I'm living here. But yeah, a lot of people like me who come here and fall in love with it. Some towns have very active contra dances. I haven't been recently, but as of a few years ago, Belfast was the dance to be at in Maine. And the more popular dances often have kind of a younger crowd there. If you get to some in small towns, it's often a lot of people who are in their 60s and above. It's a little bit slower paced. You show up and there are just smiles everywhere. There's always a live band, and depending on the town, you'll find different numbers of people. But the music comes from, a great combination of like fiddle tunes from Ireland and Scotland combined with some like music from the South and all over the place. And the dancing itself is sort of like it's derived from English country dancing, and square dancing and contra dancing broke off from that. So if you ever had to learn square dance in high school gym, there are some similar moves like the Alamand and do-si-do and things like that. And yeah, I don't know why I took to it so quickly, but I think probably because of the community of people. And that was the first time as a college student that I actually met people who were from Maine, who lived in the area, and got to develop relationships that way. Well, there are new restaurants, which was the big thing. I think when I was in my sophomore or junior year, Mother India opened on Lisbon Street, and I remember everyone was like, thank God we have an amazing restaurant opening here. And it's still one of my favorite places to go today, but places like Forage Market wasn't around, and different things like that. It's been really great seeing a lot of the empty shop fronts on Lisbon Street that are now home to these amazing businesses owned by the immigrant and refugee population. Because I came in after the majority of people had moved here from different African nations, so that's always been a part of the Lewiston that I knew. But people have definitely been, as I say, opening up a lot of businesses, and I feel like there's so much more life on Lisbon Street that I've noticed now. And just about every night of the week there's something going on in Lewiston or in Auburn that you can go to, which I don't think people expect, especially comparing it to life in Portland or some of the bigger centers. I work in education at the museum and outreach, and that has put me in a great position where I get to be like, oh, what could we do here that would be kind of neat? And then I get to research and figure out what that should be and how I can make it happen, and then it actually happens. Which is a very exciting and dynamic and fulfilling kind of work to do. I definitely like coming up with ideas and then trying to make those things happen, and I feel like a lot of jobs don't involve that as much as my job does, which has been great. Like we're having a big event in October that's a dramatic reading of a story based on a Stephen King short story set in the Maine mill, and at one point I was just sitting in my office like, Stephen King's really amazing, and I had heard that he worked in a Maine mill in high school. Like there must be something that we can do here in this Maine mill that would be fun. And a big part of what I'm hoping to do with the museum is bring in a younger generation and do fun programming. And Museum LA has always done fun programs, and they're already like, I feel like some places you'd have to talk them into it a little bit if you were maybe the traditional historic house or whatever. But here, like they're like, oh yeah, of course you can do a dramatic reading of a creepy story, and let's toss on some haunted mill tours and let's really go overboard with it. And that's been, I'm very grateful that I'm in a kind of place where I can do that.